There are more than 275,000 infections worldwide and more than 11,000 deaths. Italy crossed a grim milestone this week, surpassing China as the global epicenter of the pandemic. But there is some encouraging news about the caseload. Ian Lee is in London.
Good morning. Europe continues to struggle to contain the coronavirus. More countries are now ordering non-essential businesses to close. And when you think it can't get any worse for Italy, it does. Patients on life support in an Italian hospital. So too is the country's medical system. In the last day, 627 people have died, making it not only Italy's deadliest day, but the deadliest day worldwide since the outbreak began. Advice from Europe's epicenter: flatten the curve.
If you slow it down enough, you can take care of people. Otherwise, any health system will be overwhelmed by the mass of sick people in 1 or 2 days.
In America yesterday, drastic measures were taken as two of the nation's biggest states joined a third in ordering all non-essential workers to stay home. Now, New York and California and Illinois are in lockdown mode.
The latest numbers show why. At least 260 people in the U.S. are known to have died following infection. More than 5,300 new cases were reported Friday, bringing the current total to more than 19,000. Michael George is in Times Square with more. Michael, good morning.
Good morning, Dana, Jeff. The New York order goes into effect Sunday at 8 p.m., so the state's 19 million residents are being told to stay at home as much as possible. And all social gatherings of any size and for any reason are now banned. With New York joining California and Illinois, 70 million Americans are now being told to stay at home. Were affected by the governor's orders, as increased testing showed an increase in cases. Governor Andrew Cuomo reported New York experienced a dramatic spike by Friday morning after another 10,000 people were tested.
New York now has 7,000 cases. That compares to state of Washington that has 1,000, California that has 1,000 and change. So you can see that New York is in a dramatically different position.
The stay-at-home.
The coronavirus has killed 4,000 people in Italy. 627 have died since yesterday. Italian medical professionals are struggling to keep up with the overwhelming number of cases and deaths there. Sky News chief correspondent Stuart Ramsey takes us inside a hospital in Italy. And just a warning, you may find some of these images disturbing.
They're fighting a war here and they are losing. The sheer numbers of people succumbing to the coronavirus is overwhelming every hospital in northern Italy. The staff are working flat out, trying to keep these people from deteriorating further. They're trying to stop them from dying. This isn't an intensive care unit, it's an emergency ward. The ICU is full. People have only just arrived here and they're in terrible shape. This is an absolute constant. This killer pandemic is virtually out of control. The patients are literally gasping for air. Plastic bubbles the staff struggle to communicate through attempt to equalize the air pressure in the lungs. Nobody expected this. Nobody thought they'd be treating so many so quickly. And it's not like flu. It is chronic pneumonia, and it is killing hundreds each day.
There are now 15 patients.
The doctors say they've seen nothing like it before and are warning other countries, especially the United Kingdom, that they will see it as well.
People who keep describing this as like flu, it's worse than that, no?
No, it's totally another thing. I think it's most pneumonia than flu. Mm-hmm. Because most people get pneumonia. And as I said before, it's a very severe pneumonia. And so it's a massive strength for every health system, because we see every day 50 to 60 patients who come to our emergency department with pneumonia, and most of them are so severe they need very high FiO2 of oxygen. And so we have to reorganize our emergency room and our hospital in 3 levels of intensity, as you saw.
This is the main hospital in Bergamo, in Lombardy province. It's one of the most advanced hospitals in Europe. But it's the most hard-hit of all the hospitals in Italy. The town is the centre of the epidemic here. This isn't a ward, this is a waiting room. Wherever you go, people are on gurneys, in corridors, in meeting rooms, they're everywhere. All the medical staff urge other nations to see what's happening and lock their nations down right now or face this.
What I would suggest is just shut down to stop all the outbreak and not coming in this kind of situation that is very, very difficult to manage.
Can I ask you personally what it's been like?
I never felt so stressed in my life. I'm an intensivist, and I'm quite used to, intense moment and choices, and people are critical and will die without any, treatment, and you make the difference. But when you arrive at this point, you realize that you are not enough. And maybe we are 100 anesthetists here. We are doing our best, but maybe it's not enough.
We are performing the test for the nasal swab to detect coronavirus.
The problem facing health services across the world is that when the infection curve goes up, it rockets. And all the resources, all the testing, all the supplies are used up instantly. Multiple hospitals all at once.
What's staggering is that Italy is doing a lot of testing. Thousands upon thousands are being tested. So far, about 4,000, the numbers keep changing, have actually completely recovered. The crucial point is that about the same number are dying. They're sort of neck and neck. And it seems you either live and recover or you die. Something nobody expected.
Bergamo wanted us to see this to show what a catastrophic emergency nobody has experienced before looks like. Here they're calling it the apocalypse, and this is what it looks like. And their message to us is simple: get ready. They've run out of room at the morgue, but they haven't run out of respect for the dead at Cremona Hospital. The next batch of the lost waiting for cremation are laid out in the hospital chapel before collection. Their families couldn't even say goodbye. They're all in quarantine. It's a recurring theme now. Everyone dies alone. They came from here, the hospital's intensive care unit, which is on the brink of collapse. This is what it looks like when the virus overwhelms, and here in Lombardy, it's overwhelming. These patients are critically ill. In all probability, they won't make it. The staff have no cure available to them. They're just trying to keep them alive. Every 13 to 16 hours, they turn the patients over to relieve the pressure on the lungs. Without doubt, she wouldn't survive without constant attention. The patients are highly contagious. Where possible, they're observed from a distance, but most of the time, that isn't possible. Nobody takes any risks. They wash and sanitize constantly. Gloves, masks, and protective clothes are regularly changed. In truth, these men and women are exhausted. The system is at breaking point, and they are as well. But they keep going. They aren't the front line in this war. They are the only line.
It's a very dangerous, is a disaster, is a tsunami. And we are here 12 hours a day. Only we are go to home for a few hours and come back here for the work, because we are here for the patients.
The first, perhaps only bit of good news for the teams here is this man. We couldn't approach him, he's still too weak, but he waved. He is recovering. After 2 weeks, he is getting better. In that 2 weeks, though, not one other person on this ward improved, or worse, they died.
What's really interesting here is that now they've had to extend the intensive care unit, but now it is absolutely full. It's absolutely full in every hospital in Lombardy. They're hoping that some can be taken away. And the other really frightening development is that the patients are getting much, much younger because they are not being treated in hospital because there's no room for them. That is a big, big change because the virus has mainly affected the older age groups. Now they're talking about people in their 30s and 40s. That hasn't been seen anywhere so far.
The only illnesses being treated in Cremona Hospital now are linked to the coronavirus, and it's spreading.
We opened this side of the department to intensive care only yesterday, and today it's already full.
Well, so in 1 day it's full?
In 1 day, less than 1 day, yes.
Emanuela Catanacci is a neurosurgeon normally. Now she's working in intensive care. She asked to send a message to the world. Lockdown.
If you can see what's happened in other country or in other part of your country and wait to do something, I think now it's not more an option. Maybe at the beginning we didn't know exactly what would be happen, but now we know what happened. It's you don't think that it's happening here and it can't happen everywhere else.
It will.
Because it will if you don't do anything to stop it.
In Lombardy, they haven't run out of hope, but they're struggling with pretty much everything else. They're waiting for the epidemic to peak, but it could be weeks. It could be much longer. Stuart Ramsey, Sky News, Cremona, Italy.
This is the story of how a virus we didn't even know existed 3 months ago has changed the way we live. COVID-19 has impacted life everywhere for billions of people. And it started here in China, in the city of Wuhan. This was the local train station at the time of Chinese New Year. It was busy enough, but people were staying away. Those who had travelled were worried.
I'm sending my nephew back to Beijing. I'm his aunt. We plan to spend Chinese New Year here in Wuhan, but the situation here is not good.
I try to stay indoors as much as possible, try to avoid coming places like this where there's a lot of virus. If I do go out, I wear a mask.
At the local hospital, they were refusing all patients, except those suspected of having the virus. They were dealing with the initial outbreak. This food market was pointed to as the source of that outbreak. It was said that illegal wildlife was being sold here. On the streets of Wuhan, there was a heavy official presence as they tried to contain the virus. All wildlife and poultry was banned, and travel from the city was restricted before a total lockdown was put in place. Wuhan became the first city in the world to be sealed off. Roads were closed, trains were stopped, and flights were cancelled. A city of 11 million people was effectively quarantined. People did rush to beat the cut-off. There were soldiers with thermometers at the ready on the way out. Those who had fled spoke of their concern.
Yes, I am worried. It's said the city will be closed. I need to go back to work after Chinese New Year, but I don't know when the shutdown will stop, so I decided to leave early.
I think what the government does is right. It should have done it earlier. After all, this is a national adversity. For us, the epidemic needs to be controlled and restrained into a certain scale.
I saw it in the news. It was everywhere in the news. No one can get out after 10 a.m. I felt the situation was indeed quite serious. We had planned to go back today anyway, so we wanted to see if we could go earlier.
But this was to become a crisis that would stretch far beyond Wuhan and far beyond China. All passengers from Wuhan to the UK were supposed to be screened on landing, but that was not the case for this man.
Completely and utterly normal, aside from the fact everybody's wearing more masks than normal. And we got a leaflet as we landed, just like if you have any symptoms, there has been a virus, please contact us. However, that was all in English, it wasn't in Chinese.
The city where the mystery virus first emerged had to cope in isolation. Face masks began to rapidly sell out across China as news of this virus spread.
Now the masks are sold out 4 days already. Like this morning, just within about 1 hour, we had a dozen people coming in to ask if we have masks.
I was busy just now and I forgot about the mask, but I should really wear it.
News of the outbreak travelled quickly, and we began to learn more about this worrying new virus.
This is the Wuhan novel coronavirus. Now, coronaviruses are a large family of viruses that can cause illness ranging from the common cold to more severe outbreaks, such as Middle East respiratory syndrome, MERS, and severe acute respiratory syndrome, known as SARS. Now, this strain, called 2019 novel coronavirus, or nCoV, has not previously been identified in humans, so there's no vaccine, humans have no immunity, and the virus is able to mutate, making it hard to control.
Within days, cases of the virus were reported in other countries in the Far East. In Japan, masked commuters staggered their journeys to work to avoid crowds. Schools shut for most of March. Many offices temporarily closed. Employees like Taki were encouraged to work from home.
I'm very worried about the coronavirus, so I'm working from home, and I'm also putting mask and have a sanitizer, and try to not going to the crowded place and avoiding the train, so forth, so on.
The Diamond Princess cruise ship was forced to dock at Yokohama and stay there after a man who disembarked in Hong Kong was found to have the virus. More than 600 people on board also tested positive for it. It was one of the largest cluster of cases outside of China. After 17 days in quarantine, some of the passengers were able to head for home. Alan and Vanessa Sanford hadn't left their room for a fortnight.
I think I might struggle a bit more with this second lot of 14 days.
What's worrying you?
Well, just that you can't get on with your life, that everything's on hold. And you also feel, but I've got this certificate that says I'm negative for the virus, and nobody on the aircraft is going to be anything other than negative for the virus. It just seems excessive. But I do understand as well that people are nervous about having people back in the country.
And when they got back to England, a further period in quarantine on the Wirral awaited them. This was the advice they were given by one man who had stayed there after getting home from Wuhan.
I won't lie, it is going to be boring at times, but, if you can sort of interact with others a little bit and, use the entertainment systems that you have, the time should pass pretty quickly.
While the Olympic Games are still going ahead, Japan's Prime Minister requested that other big events be postponed. Fewer people means less chance of potentially deadly clusters. But hundreds of infections were confirmed anyway, and fear started hitting Japanese businesses. Visitor numbers dropped quickly.
These days, we don't have a lot of people from United States or England or Europe, of course. So we are just worried if we can get the tourists.
It didn't take long for this virus to move out of the Far East and much further afield. At the end of January, Italy detected and isolated its first 2 cases. Both were Chinese tourists. Prime Minister Giuseppe Conte immediately declared a state of emergency for 6 months, and Italy became the first country in the world to block flights from China.
The economic impact could be very strong. At this moment, we can calculate that there will be a negative economic impact, but we're not able to predict how it is going to be, because we don't know yet the containment effect of the countermeasures that we adopted.
But by early March, the country had the second highest number of infections outside China. And that was despite an initial lockdown that saw 10 towns in northern Italy put into isolation. This was the area where Europe's outbreak seems to have started. People needed special permission to get in or out. As we filmed, 2 ambulances came out of the red zone. The paramedics in this one were wearing full-body protective suits. Just a few hours' drive away from here are popular French ski resorts like Chamonix.
I worry a lot, but I try to, travel with the mask and be careful, no?
I want to make sure that we kind of assist with public health efforts to avoid a spread, but I don't feel personally nervous about it.
In Switzerland, the World Health Organization is leading the fight against the virus.
The lesson is that every country has to be ready. Every country has to invest heavily in their health systems. So whenever virus comes, they can quickly detect, test, and provide health care for those who are sick.
Delegations come here from around the world to seek advice. Among the visitors, the British former Health Secretary.
The truth is that Schengen or no Schengen, we are in such a globalised world, as you can see by the way it's spread, that everyone has to take precautions. Even though the mortality rate at 1–3% sounds low, if millions and millions of people get this virus, that is a lot of deaths. And so that's why we have to prepare for worst-case scenarios.
Europe's response was calm and measured, but nobody could have predicted the restrictions that would soon follow. The epidemic spread rapidly to other countries, with France, Germany, Spain and the UK all recording sharp rises in cases. Some of Spain's first cases were recorded in the Canary Islands. This hotel in Tenerife confined guests to their rooms after a couple from northern Italy tested positive for the virus.
A letter was slipped under our door before we woke up. That's all we know.
It said that we weren't allowed to leave the room for medical reasons or something.
Medical tents were put in place outside hotel reception, with doctors ready to respond. The NHS subsequently issued new guidance to people.
If people come back from northern Italy and they subsequently, in the next 14 days, get symptoms, we recommend that they self-isolate and then phone 111.
While that was Britain's approach, other countries reacted differently. Italy went into a full-scale lockdown. Police outnumbered the public on the streets of Rome. Anyone passing needed a permit and a reason why.
At first, you might think it's a cold. And it could be. But COVID-19 could escalate. Here's what you need to know. According to the World Health Organization China Joint Mission on COVID-19, as of February 20th, 80% of laboratory-confirmed cases were mild to moderate, 14% were severe, and 6% were critical. Just to be clear, a mild case of COVID-19 is not like a mild cold. The symptoms will still be pretty severe. Anything less than needing oxygen puts you in this category. Severe cases do need supplemental oxygen, and critical ones are defined by respiratory or multi-organ failure. The symptoms, treatments, and timelines of having the disease vary, depending on which category patients fall into. So let's break down what having COVID-19 looks like day to day for each level of severity. It can take as few as 2 or as many as 14 days after being exposed to the novel coronavirus for the first symptom to develop. This is when it might feel like a cold or the common flu. Many patients develop fevers early on. The World Health Organization China Joint Mission saw that about 88% of people who had COVID-19 had a fever. Another study out of China showed that while only 44% of patients had a fever on admission to a hospital, 89% eventually developed one. But there have been some cases that led with gastrointestinal symptoms. Diarrhea, nausea, vomiting, and/or abdominal discomfort may appear a couple of days before respiratory symptoms. This isn't the norm, though, because COVID-19 is a respiratory disease. That means for most patients, the virus will start and end with the lungs. In the early days of infection, the virus invades lung cells. Specifically, this can damage the cilia, the hair-like projections that move around to keep airways clear of mucus and debris. When cells get infected, they die and shed off, adding to the debris and hindering your body's ability to keep stuff out of the lungs and trachea. The inflammation causes damage, and damage causes more inflammation, and this cycle could continue until there's no healthy tissue left. And inflammation might explain why a dry cough is one of the most common symptoms. Same goes for shortness of breath and phlegm production. Other symptoms that can appear around this time are fatigue, sore throat, headache, joint or muscle pain, chills, and a runny nose. By day 5, patients with pre-existing conditions might find that they have trouble breathing, and it usually takes about 7 days for a person to go to a hospital. Mild cases, though, usually clear up by this time. But those with moderate to critical cases will have developed pneumonia, which can range from non-life-threatening to severe. Recovery time for these patients could be anywhere from a few days to weeks. For some severe and critical cases, though, symptoms can escalate into acute respiratory distress syndrome. ARDS is an illness that happens when fluid builds up in the lungs. Inflammation triggers a flood of immune cells that are meant to target the infection. They're usually isolated to infected areas, but sometimes the body goes overboard, which is when the immune cells start killing anything in their path, including healthy cells. ARDS is often fatal. In critical cases, it can lead to respiratory failure, requiring advanced life support, and this is most likely when patients head to the ICU. ARDS treatment includes supplemental oxygen and mechanical ventilation. The goal is to get more oxygen into the bloodstream, since the lungs can't. When this treatment doesn't work, the lungs are basically too flooded to get any oxygen into your bloodstream. That's the cause of most COVID-19 deaths. And even when a patient survives this phase, they could be left with permanent lung damage. SARS punched holes in some infected people's lungs, giving them a honeycomb effect. And these lesions have been seen in people affected by the novel coronavirus too. Early studies found that most people who die of the disease will do so within 14 to 19 days. And on average, people who recover are released from the hospital after 2.5 weeks. But with the most critical cases, recovery could take months. Once a patient is in the recovery period, it's possible that they could still be contagious. These people should work with their doctors and public health officials to determine when they're no longer a risk. As of now, there is no vaccine for the virus, so the best way to avoid getting sick is to avoid being exposed. COVID-19 spreads easily from person to person through coughing and sneezing, so wash your hands often and avoid close contact with people who are sick, and clean and disinfect surfaces that you use daily. COVID-19 should be taken seriously, but most cases are survivable.